right. Stuart, I'm gonna let you have the mic.
Hi, I'm Stuart McCown, and I work with the marketing development of a startup known as Cheaters Club. And I'm also an alum of CSUSM. And I'm, as you can see, ready for the pre-kin. And here's Curling with more.
All right. Thanks, Stuart. And Stuart, I was gonna give you a little shout out because you're gonna be speaking in these sessions in the near future. You give people a preview on that.
And in the future, I will make a demonstration on how to connect to your VCs, angel investors, and otherwise through looking at different channels online and offline. Uh, Hopefully in the future series.
No, that's great. And Stuart, you thanks for helping out the cohort. The cohort itself's been around for about a year, mostly Cal State San Marcos students. But Stuart, you've been great at helping with people with research, helping people with data analytics. So just give you a shout out for that.
Thank you so much.
Um, Professor Clark, could you give just a little bit of your background? Just a little bit. I know everybody on the call knows, but just a little bit of your background because people from Connect All will be listening too.
Hi, my name is Sam Clark. I'm an assistant professor of entrepreneurship at CSUSM, also the director, one of the directors of the Innovation Hub at CSUSM. Serial entrepreneur and, one of the people working closely with the tech school through the Innovation Hub. So great to be here.
Now that's and you always are like on the when we need someone on the panel to be a judge, you're like ready. You're like I think I think we all connected at was it Startup Week, Professor
Yeah,
Clark?
originally we connected. Our first thing we did together, we did mentoring sessions. How many years ago was that?
Oh man, that was a long time ago, man.
Yeah.
Like 20 years.
Yeah. So that's where we first connected, and we've been, working with together on startups ever since. So
Yeah, it's great. I literally called Sam. I said, you know what? I tonight I have to do this kind of demo night pitch competition for Startup Month, and usually I just have the groups watch and see like for cohorts. It's like go watch this demo, demo day or pitch competition from Y Combinator or for USC, and that's how I kind of prepare them so they can go. That's kind of like my methodology too. Like for instance, if you're gonna go to like a Tech Coast Angels, you have to present to them. There's ways you can actually watch previous people pitch to Tech Coast Angels or something like. That's usually how I get people kind of ready or prepared. But the other way actually do it, I tell them about scenarios too, my scenarios because I did tons of competitions too. So I want to kind of go over a little bit about what that looks like as a judge point of view, what I'm looking for, Professor Clark, what you're looking for. Also, we have Joanna Robinson. She's been part of that. So it's a little bit how do you prepare for demo day. The demo day we're going to do tonight, and just so everyone knows, for Startup Month, this is the last week. And tonight is the demo day showcase. So we had 10 incubator companies that we've been helping out through the whole month. And those 10 are going to be kind of giving a demo day kind of pitch competition or pitch presentation. It's about 2 minutes long. So so people know, sometimes these are really short. So 2 minutes long. And then the judges will give 3 minutes to give them feedback and things of that nature. So that's kind of like the format tonight. So most of the time, people when they pitch, they might not have it down to 2 minutes. And I think what would be, I'll give you a question, Professor Clark. You preparing someone to do a 2 minute pitch, right? What would be the crucial things you would want to hear in that 2 minutes?
well, first of all, it's a short amount of time, right? When we talk about elevator pitching, where 30 seconds, 2 minutes is not so much further along than that. So you have to be very quick and get to the points that you're trying to come across. So I always think of a pitch has to answer 3 questions. I always start with the why. So why are you doing this? This is the problem that you're trying to solve. This is what you're going to catch the audience with the most, I believe, is because if they can resonate with the problem that you're trying to solve, or you can share it in a way that makes sense to them, Then when you present, the next thing is what you're doing, and that's your solution, your product or your service, the thing that you're trying to solve that problem with. I think that it becomes a clear connection. That's what you want to try to create as quickly as possible, is that there's a problem and we have a solution for that problem. And you do that within the first 30 seconds. And then I think the piece that takes up most of the time is the third question, or the third question you're going to answer is the how. How are you going to do it, right? And that's your business model. And your business model is going to explain how, the way in which you create and then deliver your products or services to your customer segment. So in a sense, that problem, solution, business model is important. And that answers the question of why you're doing it, what you're doing, and how you're doing it. So those are the three things I always say. Get to those as quickly as possible.
Yeah, and probably like you front load those, right? And then if you have anything like some sort of technical advantage or something like you want to add in, maybe add that at the end.
Yeah, that's what I would say in the how section, right? How are you doing this differently than everybody else? If you're, maybe your solution is very new and innovative and it's patented, and that creates your competitive advantage, and that could be clearly shared. But most of the time you're selling something similar to your competitors. And so the how is really where you're going to win over, investors and win over people on your side. Because if you're doing something, if you're selling a solution that has similarities to other organizations, other companies, other startups, then really the only thing that differentiates you, the only thing that gives you an advantage in competition, the ability to be successful, is how you do it. And that's your business model. And it has to be different, it has to be innovative, and creates that advantage for you.
Creates that advantage. One question I have offhand, when cause you have a group of like students or younger and things of that nature, and maybe in your classes maybe you help prepare them for, but I had a scenario Jonah was talking about, like, well, I had a kind of pitch in front of USC. We had this kind of fraternity engineering group, and it was just so funny because I memorized my 2 minutes. I had literally 2 minutes to actually kind of pitch for a panel of engineers and stuff like that. And in the middle of it, it was so funny, Sam. Like in the middle of it, someone said like 1 minute or like 1 minute left or something like that, and my whole memory just got blinked out. Like the cache was cleared, and I could not remember anything that part of that part, right? But this might be go to what we talked about with Michael Ryan Norton. I had this story block. I had some default things I can talk about Fokcus, and that's what I did for that last minute, right? Now my team said, like, you didn't say anything that you memorized. No patent thing. You didn't know that. But for the audience itself, it actually looked pretty seamless, right? So those kind of like these story blocks, I learned that from Michael Ryan Norton, who talked about stories and things at Cal State San Marcos, about having these kind of story blocks. I believe Jonah even knows. So I think there was a Mark who's from TEDx, and he helped us learn about story blocks. You remember that, Joanna? It was a really.
I do, but I can't remember his last name. But his name is Mark something.
Yeah, but you remember about the story blocks thing was interesting, and you always talk
useful.
about what it is actually you try to have a story block about your team, maybe just a small segment of information about your team, a small story block about maybe what your product is and how your services work, and maybe even like something about what's maybe your exit strategy, because sometimes I get that in part, like what does that look like. So I have these story blocks about Fokcus, and so when things like that happen, because it always happens to me, like something like that, I have these kind of story blocks. So that was one way TEDx, from the TEDx family, how they prepared us for presentations. But I thought that was useful. I was gonna tell people that, like, hey, it happened to curling. I always like pitch and stuff like that.
Yeah, something that I like going along with just how quick these story blocks make it possible, so you can move things around, you can adjust to the audience. But one thing that I really like from Guy Kawasaki, he talked about, he gave the example of your presentation in this kind of format should be like a jet aircraft going off, or a jet going off an aircraft carrier. It's got to be right to the point, right? Not, he calls it, not a 747 that lumbers down the runway for hundreds of yards before it can finally take off. And so one of the things he suggests, and it is, I think, important how you arrange some of these story blocks. he gave the example that oftentimes when you're talking to venture capitalists, they're talking about, say, teams, right? The team is what's the most important. And so when a lot of entrepreneurs come into pitch, they start with their team, like who am I? What, who are the team members? And he says that is a 747 presentation. Because it takes so long to get to the point of why you're doing it and what you're doing that those people listening, those investors, venture capitalists have already checked out. Right? They're not into 747. And so arrange those story blocks and getting quickly to the punch. Right? You want to say problem, solution. So that from that point forward on, now all you're talking about is how does it work? And those things can include discussions about teams and can include discussions about funding and marketing and sales channels, and depending on your audience. But the first thing should always be connecting a problem to a solution, the customers to your product in a very organized, thoughtful way.
That's a good transition, Professor Clark, because one thing I do tell groups when they say, like, Colin, I need help with this. We're about to do a pitch competition. We're about to do something at Techos Angels. We're going to do something at Wise. Like, what do you think when you're talking about audience? So, like, how does that affect your presentation offhand?
Well, you're going to use a similar presentation, especially as an early stage startup, to attract all different types of resources. So you're going to have presentations that are focused on a venture capitalist, on an angel investor, on potential business partners. And so that, in a sense, all of these are what we'd say a sales pitch. Consider each one a customer in some regard, even though they might be partners, either as financial partners or maybe or partners within the business. But you're going to present to meet their needs, right? So if you're pitching to a venture capitalist, one of the things that you'll include in there is probably some additional discussion on how much money you need and what that money is going to be used for within the business model. When you're pitching to a customer, you're going to talk about other parts, the value they get from the product, the value they get from going with you versus a competitor. If you're pitching to a business partner, right, they're going to have some other outcomes. You're going to adjust them. That's how I'd say you do different. So in a pitch competition, who are these people? It's a little bit more challenged because you're not, how do you identify? Are they taking on a role as an investor type role? And so your pitch is going to be designed more towards the investors, where you're going to talk about financial needs, what money is going to be used for, or is it more of like you're pitching for advisors and mentors? Yeah. And at that point in time, like the financial discussion is not as important as maybe like some of the challenges you have currently within your model that you're trying to fix. So you might say, if I'm pitching to a potential advisor, I might say, hey, here's the problem I'm trying to solve. Here's how what I'm doing. Here's my business model. And I have these gaps that I think you would be able to help me fix.
I love that.
So that's how I present it to it, like an advisor. Advisors are most going to come in focusing on fixing the problems within your business model. And so tonight might be more of that, where we're looking at attracting people to come in and help at certain parts of the business.
No, you're correct. Yeah, tonight is more in the fact that there's a great, huge community in San Diego that wants to help. Actually, a lot of the entrepreneurs there. There'll be people from Techos Angels. There'll be people like from UCSD, all the colleges, things of that nature. But people who want to help these groups that were deemed to be like selected 10, right, the top 10. That is the audience. But at the same time, there will be people there who are investors, and so that's always that fine line. I do tell people, regardless, have some sort of ask slide, and we can talk more about that. But definitely what you just said, most of the people that are in our kind of ecosystem, they actually need some sort of advisory boards, right? And so I tell them on that ask slide, maybe put on the fact that you need someone that could help you with maybe supply chain problems that you have, right? We have a couple people in our incubator right now that actually have a supply chain issue, never worked in China before or worked with groups. Like, get someone on the board who is pretty solid at that and be very specific, right? So even though some of them were saying, should I have the ask slide that actually has them the funding I need. I said, well, you know what? For this one, I would probably just make sure I have this ask slide for specifically what you need. But
Yeah.
What's your thought process on that?
Well, and I always think of in any situation, what you're doing is you're running things through this business model, right? You're running through the process you're developing, and there's inefficiencies along the way. Most of the time, those inefficiencies are solved by you personally working through them, right? Because we don't have the automation, we might not have the employees. And so you're doing all those. And I think the important thing for an entrepreneur to always do is, okay, we're running customers through, and now we can easily start identifying where the biggest challenges are. And there's always a couple of different ways of solving those. And at a certain point, you raise money and you throw money at the problem, right? By buying technology or hiring employees. But when your business model is so early on, you're looking for advisors in a sense to solve specific parts of those problems in a way that doesn't require, what you're grabbing on is the people who are willing to spend a little bit of time with you because they like you.
Yeah.
They want to mentor you, and you can say, here is the specific problem, like supply chain. We're having issues with supply chain. And then we plug in a specific advisor to help solve that problem, right?
I love that.
You don't want to just have advisors just in general, because what ends up happening is you have too many people in your ear sharing too many different things, and it doesn't really help you improve your business model. So I think when you're making these ask slides, you should have identified maybe the 3 challenges you want to fix. Okay. And maybe tonight, for example, maybe 2 of those would be solved very well with a mentor and advisor coming in, just teaching you something. Maybe that's
sure.
And maybe one of those might be something where you say, hey, this can be fixed with $100,000 investment from an angel. We could buy this technology or this piece of equipment, and it would allow us to, streamline the process, improving our return. Then you kind of have an ask that's broad there, right? You're asking for advisors, you're asking for, maybe those funding, those investor types that are in the crowd can see where they fit into your business, where they can plug in and be helpful.
I love that. I want to switch gears. We were kind of on the fact that how you actually prepare for this 2 minutes, right? And I also want to know from the judge's point of view, right? We have 3 minutes to give you some feedback, right? 3 minutes. We're trying to be helpful. We're trying to help that founder, that little Sam, that little Stuart, Joanna, or little Joanna. Like, we want to help them in that 3 minutes. What are some of the things you always maybe ask or maybe want to give someone feedback on?
When I talk about it?
Yeah, when you're like a judge and try to give them feedback in that 3 minutes, like you might say like, oh, you know what? Like, what are some things that you frequently gave groups feedback on?
Well, I think the biggest issue you see early on with a lot of startups is mismatch. They have no product market fit, right? They're trying to force a product into a market versus looking at a market and solving a problem, right?
That's
and it's just one of those things that traditionally and naturally, you just start with an idea, right? You start with like, hey, I have this great product idea.
Yeah.
And then you go looking for a market to sell it in, and you realize that it's not as easy, or it wasn't aligned. So I think we spend a lot of time just understanding, is their product market fit? And that's that relationship from the problem to the solution. Do they fit and create enough value for your customers? So that's I think a big one on business model discussions, right? I think that I'm trying to think of business model, there's just so many pieces to it.
So many pieces. I know you always have that great example, Professor Clark, with the Zen diagram, right?
Yeah.
With Uber.
Yeah. I think something to consider, again, maybe going back to my last comments, when we're talking about the business model, you should have identified those parts of the business model that are inefficient.
Okay, got it.
Right? You should be clearly say, hey, in a sense, that same thing. Where do you need help? Like what's holding you back, right? And if somebody says, for example, like, I need money for marketing, that's not a sufficient answer.
Yeah.
Because have you done what's the marketing process, and at what point is there money needed within that marketing system, right? Marketing is a system, sales are a system. These are all systems, and they have to have clearly identified places where funding or needs are needed. So
I like that a lot. This one I always I see a lot, and it's just sometimes I just need clarification when I give them feedback, and then I give them feedback. But sometimes I ask them like, "Who is your customer?" That's the one. I might have the whole presentation. It might have been longer than 2 minutes, but sometimes I'm like unclear on that.
Yeah. That goes that product market fit. It's like you don't know your customer. A good example, and this is something that's tricky with some of these things, right? Who is Google's customer? Who is Facebook's customer? I have a Facebook account, but I'm technically not their customer. I don't pay. Like the easiest way to identify who a customer is, who's giving you money for your solution.
That's a great one. Yeah,
right?
That's solid. Yeah.
So as a Facebook, I'm a user, not a customer.
Okay.
And a user is actually in this business model, in this sense, is actually a business partner within the business model. I partner with Facebook in a sense. I sign up for an account. That has a cost to it.
Yes.
Now, for Facebook, they've got that down to fractions of a penny.
Right. The margins are.
For some of me, especially, I don't post anything. So I don't have videos and things on there eating up storage space. But I'm an expense to Facebook. Then they go and their customer is an actual company who wants to advertise, and they use the users as the means to achieve their financial model, right? So it's kind of interesting because we often think sometimes of ourselves as customers in certain aspects, but we're not. It's really the person who pays the money that we're trying to identify.
Yeah, and that's I love how you kind of differentiate the user and customer, because that's why I usually tell people like I understand all that, but who's actually paying you? Like, let's just get down to that, and what's that margins there? I even have these questions here from the entrepreneurs like, do you have contracts? If so, like how they get renewed. That helps me out a lot more. If he's like, you have a contract, like that, at least that tells me who's paying you, right? So sometimes I go more deeper in that. If you can answer, if you have a contract, who's renewing it, that helps me out a lot more. I know exactly who your customer is.
Yeah. The other thing I'd say about presentation is there's two parts to a startup presentation, right? There's the point where we call it storytelling.
Okay.
It really is a story, and most of it's fiction. Because you're just starting, right?
Yeah.
Like you're talking about the dreams and visions and so forth, and you're working through how to make it come to reality, and that's the hard part of being an entrepreneur, right? But you're always talking about what it can be. But the second part, and I think this goes to a little bit of what you're talking about too, Curling, is and it helps us identify, is that we also communicate, and this is something that's for business in general. We also communicate through financials, right? So everything we say in a story has to be shared in a succinct manner in financials. And so that's the other part of storytelling. And sometimes people, you use different means to get the word across, the point across, right? And so you're using some amount of storytelling and some amount of financials because we communicate in business through financial statements. And so including things like some comments about price and value, right? My customer values this to some degree, so we can set the price here. Like those are things that you would get in those early stages of customer discovery that you can share with people, right?
Oh, I love that. I love how you talked about customer discovery, because I do ask that question sometimes. I asked like, how many have you had at USC? We always wanted the startups at least have about 50 customer discovery one in person, just so they know that could be one thing I try to find out in that 2 minutes is that we call it a product market fit is one piece, right? Where you're making something that people love, but this founder market fit is really good, meaning that you're the right founder to solve this problem, right? And so I try to understand that and see if I can learn that in that 2 minutes. But I was gonna ask you a question on that. How do you everyone says the team, but how do you kind of evaluate the team when you're looking at demo days or pitch decks? Like what's one indicator that you kind of say that it might be a good founder who could solve this problem?
So when it comes to team, I always go back to the business model, right? So
Okay.
your team should align with specific parts in the business model. And if there's overlap or they don't align, it's not a great team member.
Got it.
And so the obvious one, if we think of just the fundamentals of a business model in terms of somebody's got to build the product and somebody's got to sell it, right? Then your initial team should be focused on one person who's on the sales side of it and one person who's on the build side of it. So usually that's it, like an engineer and a business person, right? Because the engineer is focused on building, the business person focuses on selling. Like that should be the initial structure. So if you come in with a or you come in with a team and you have two business people, but you have no engineers and you're building a technology, an app, say, then I would say that your team is not aligned, right? You have overlap in one area and nothing in the other. Now, as your business model gets more sophisticated, you should have more than one person in each, like not in each category, but they should align. So as you add members to your team, you're adding them for specific purposes, not just, again, to be a general, it's like if you need somebody to manage, this part of the engineering over here, and then maybe testing, you might hire a second person to manage testing, but they should fit in this process that you're putting together. I hope that makes sense, because I think we see that a lot with teams. Is they come in, they say, hey, you know what? There's two of us for business students. We need an engineer, right? That's a common question we get a lot. As startups, and you do need an engineer, because you're not going to be successful. You're not going to be able to raise funds. You're not going to do those things unless you put people in the right spot. And if you can't find an engineer and there's two of you, then one of you should become an engineer. Because you need them to fill a different spot. You need them to fill that spot. So.
And we've seen that, right? With founders like Jason McBride, right? You helped them learn. I think you gave him some training videos, right, Professor Clark, on just so he can learn how to actually build a website, right?
Yeah, and it's getting easier than it's ever been in terms of doing some amount of development. But you know what? You're going to go into some situations, and again, tonight might be the time that says this: is, hey, here's our business model, and here's our inefficiencies, and we need a couple people, not as advisors, but to come work for us in these three spots, right? We need somebody to do engineering. We need somebody to do this. Because we've identified that's what maybe I have inefficient. It takes me a really long time to write code. I can do it, but it takes me a lot longer than somebody who does it every day. And so that's where we fill in the blank. So I think teams, they struggle in that, because they usually partner with people they know, and it's not always the best scenario, because people might not fulfill all the needs of your business. And overlap is probably the worst, when there's two people that are basically can do the exact same job and you're resource constrained. It doesn't seem like a good way to spend your resources.
I love that when you talk about that scenario about having someone dedicated to sales, someone that is Y Combinator's Michael Siebel and Justin Kahn. They created a company called Twitch. And the interesting thing is that they said at the beginning, it was three of them. They decided, okay, Michael, you're gonna be the biz dev guy, right? You're gonna just focus on getting sales, what that looks like, legal, right? Justin, you're gonna work on just the product, right? Like, what does that look like? And they had a third guy who's just engineering, building out the fact that they were gonna have streaming. And so he said there was less fights when that happened, right? It was less fights than saying like, oh, what should the product be, blue, or I think it should be bamboo. Like, no, that's Justin's job to just focus on what the product looks like. Your job like that. So those are things that if I know up front that you're very clear on what the team is doing, I think that really stands out in that 2 minutes. It stands out that at least you guys understand that.
Yeah, and I think it's just relate what your team members to different parts of the business model when you're pitching. This person does this. This person does that, and if they're looking and you've explained how it all works, then it will easily align with what these people are doing and so forth. But it's okay to also, in your ask, it's one of those things to ask for, you're looking for employees.
Yeah, I love that.
Right?
I love that.
Again, that's a slightly different audience, but tonight's audience might be a good place to ask for that type of need, right?
If you were getting feedback on you're the founder, Professor Clark, pitching and then getting feedback, how do you handle feedback offhand? I've seen it done in a lot of different ways of handling feedback from maybe someone who's fairly knowledgeable and things of that nature, but just that part of it sometimes turns people off, how they handle feedback.
Yeah.
You have any feedback on that?
Well, I think it does turn off judges when you're not taking it as coachable, right?
Nah.
Because you have to assume as a presenter that they're not going to understand it as deeply as you will, right?
Sure.
And so their understanding is a very narrow, and so they're going to ask questions that you might find uninteresting, or you might already have like thought of it, and worked through it. And in those cases, it's somewhat of an easy answer because you can talk about how you work through it. But I like, when you're taking it, it's nice to stand up there and just take some notes, right? Because there's a couple things you're going to learn from it. One, they might bring up a concern that you haven't thought of. They might bring up a concern that you've thought of before, but somehow failed to be able to include it in your quick pitch, right? And it might be important enough that says somewhere along the line, I lost them.
Yes.
Right? Or there was something that's really that does need to be included in here because it would make more sense, but I didn't include it in my pitch. And so we could get those feedback. So I think you just take a lot more in these scenarios as more of a time for coaching.
I love that.
Now, I think it's different again if you're in a venture capital situation, right? In terms of preparation and then the backup, right? I think you're talking a little bit about those story blocks,
sure.
But we also have those included in slide decks, right? So usually your slide deck is maybe 3 or 4 or 5 slides, but then you have 30 slides of backup, right?
Right.
Because I think in a venture capital setting, they're going to ask questions that, again, have to be translated to financial statements. And so you need to be able to talk about each one of those things in more detail. Because when we talk about a business model, you're going to have to show expenses. When we talk about a sales model, you're going to have to show conversions. You're going to have to show pricing. You're going to have to show expected value, those things. But in a quick pitch, take notes of those things that people are coming up and make sure that those are included in your future pitching.
I love that. Joanna's on. She's really solid at making sure that we have the main pitches, right? The main slides, maybe the first 5, first 10. And then we have all these addendum slides, right? Like, okay, this is margins. This is our kind of customer acquisition. This is some of the numbers there. So, Joanna, you always are really solid at that. So thank you for making sure that's solid. I have a question too, offhand. Professor Clark, when you were actually on the judge, when you were a panel and things of that nature, did you ever hear judges not give really good advice? How people have handled that? I've been part of panels like, I don't know, that's not the most solid one. But we got. Have you been in that situation as a judge? It's just
Yeah, I mean, I think there's different trains of thoughts, and what I think the biggest difference is, and what you'll find with some judges now, is that we really do start businesses much differently than we did a decade ago.
That's it. Yeah.
Sometimes when you get a judge, they're an entrepreneur. They started a business, but they started more than a decade ago.
Right.
And they're successful. Maybe they're super successful and so forth. But their advice is kind of based on the way in which we started businesses in the past. And I think we've moved more to the lean startup style,
yes.
Boots, not necessarily all boots, but those early stages where you're doing customer discovery, design thinking, and so forth. And so you do get, I think, some advice is, I still get it a lot, is like around writing business plans. And
yes.
We've definitely moved far away from writing business plans.
I just recently heard that though.
Yeah. And it's just because you can't plan for uncertainty. You have some frameworks that are logical and make sense, and they're easily adaptable and change. Whereas writing a business plan that you think you're going to predict the future, never works out. And so, but that's how we used to do it, right?
That's how we used to do it.
That's how we did it. Everybody planned for everything, and it took us years to plan. And then you go out and you start and you realize, oh, that plan was a bad idea.
Yeah, it definitely was.
So I think that's where you see most of the discrepancy, is that some of the older styles of starting businesses creep in. I think it's much cheaper to start a business, especially like a technology business.
Definitely.
You don't need nearly as much money to build an app than you did in the past, right? And even some of the technology, some of the manufacturing of hard tech and things like that, and you can get through prototypes and stuff for fairly low cost with things like 3D printing and the Adrenos and those things that you don't need spend all the money on machining tools and building custom microprocessors. Like, you can get away with kind of testing your ideas out at an early stage with what we have. So it's kind of nice that way.
Stuart, you can unmute yourself. That's a great question, and I do have some feedback on that too. But Professor Clark might have some too.
Okay. Basically, what I wanted to know is if there are any online resources to quickly generate a financial model for pitch decks, kind of like I guess you could say, generic model where, say, you're going for seed funding. You understand many of the elements you're dealing with in a business situation. However, I wanted to know what would be some of the things that you were mentioning before that you would have to account for, especially in your ask, and dividing all of that up. Like, is there a survey somebody could take that's available to entrepreneurs, maybe, so they can kind of go through some of these processes where they're like, oh, I didn't think about that legal aspect, or I didn't think about the X, Y, or Z. That's all I want to know.
No, I like it. I'll let you start first, Professor Clark, on that.
Yeah, there's a bunch of resources. I was just thinking, there's templates all over the place. Students right now are using the SCORE templates, and I know Curling used to do some stuff with SCORE.
Yes.
I think they have a decent amount of good templates on SCORE with instructional videos, which helps you work through the different financial models, right? I think that when the founders, you're looking obviously for, again, it goes back to how you arrange your business model, because that's going to dictate your financial models. Because what you include on say, the engineering, the creating, the building of the business side, those are all going to be expenses. And then forecasting, I think forecasting sales really comes from customer development, customer research. I should say customer discovery, right?
Yeah, customer discovery.
You're going to determine value and price from those interviews. You're going to determine willingness to buy, those kind of things. And so that's going to inform your other side. And so if you've done that research, if you've done the research on the expenses, and you've done the research with your customers on value, price, willingness to buy, then you're going to easily complete financial models. Most of the time when we do these things, financial models, if we've done that research, it really is something that we spend maybe the initial drafting of it doesn't take maybe 30 minutes to put together estimates, and then you're always updating them as your business model changes, as you adapt to going out and talking to customers or inefficiencies, or you add new technology, then you go update your business model, right? Maybe you need to add new technology, and there's a new cost to that. And so then you go update your models and so forth. So, but the initial one really comes down to customer discovery, and then kind of that cost analysis of your business model.
No, that's great. And Joanna, you've been solid on the Fokcus side, and you're just kind of Excel guru, but you gave some feedback to everybody too, right?
Oh yeah, I was just saying Excel is free, or it's not free necessarily, but almost everybody has it, right? And there's Google Sheets that is free, but once you I don't always start from what am I supposed to have here? I start from what do we actually have here? What are we spending money on? What are the parts of our business that are not moving the way that we want, that we would spend money on? And I make just tables in Excel that list those things, and then I keep track of them on a kind of monthly basis. And that's makes it pretty easy to kind of forecast. And you can build some assumptions in Excel. You just, once you get the formula, you can drag it across and say like, okay, for the next 5 years, here's what it looks like if it increases, 1% per month or something, or if it increases, 10% annually. So you can kind of predict like, your utilities and your cell phones and your, whatever your business costs are, your hosting fees, how they're going to increase over time, and build those assumptions in. And Excel is a great tool for doing that. And it's very easy to use, I think.
No, that's great. And that's kind of like what Professor Clark was saying in your addendum, or even just in fact, if you have a different audience, at least having some of those numbers there in the deck. So you actually kind of know like, okay, this is a little bit what our next 6 months looks like, right?
But I built ours, with the score model as a baseline.
That's true.
From your friend John, he'd given us that spreadsheet that had all the expenses in it, and I just used that as my checklist for like, oh, well, we don't currently have facilities fees, but by the time we're this size, we probably will have facility fees, so that I could look out and say like, maybe for the first 2 years, no facilities fees, but then starting in the third year, they may be like some, co-working space fees, or, or we're going to rent a room somewhere, or we'll figure it out. But I think, you can, it's good to have those things kind of as a checklist to make sure that you're building them into your future model, because your startup expenses are not. You may have one-time startup expenses at the beginning that you won't have recurring, and you may have expenses that you haven't considered or thought about yet, because you haven't encountered them yet in the early stages of your startup, that you want to make sure, especially if you're looking out like 3 to 5 years. But like Sam said, it's all fiction, right?
It's just fiction.
It's still hypothetical.
Great novel.
It might get you in the, and I treat project plans the same way, right? It gets you in the ballpark. It's going to take approximately 5 years. You're going to the magnitude, like if you're talking millions or trillions, or, or hundreds of thousands, you may just get the magnitude. But the exercise is always good, because then you have the model. And as you get real information, you get closer and closer to real numbers.
And this is a little bit off of what we're general discussion today, but going on what Joanna was saying is, I usually write multiple stories with my financial model, right?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Because what you're going to do is, you start sometimes with the dream model. Like you walked with a blank check.
Everybody loves it.
If somebody walked up with a blank check, what would we do, right? And then the other extreme is bootstrapping, where you have is whatever's in your pocket. And those are the things. And so you look at it and say, oh, if we had a blank check, we would have an office space. Right. But if we don't have, if we're taking out of my pocket, it's going to be a garage, right? Yeah. And it's going to be much cheaper. And so I think I write multiple financials because I tell multiple stories. It depends on who I'm talking to. Yeah. But it also gives you that better scope, right? This is the scope of what would happen if we had all the resources in the world on one extreme. And here's the scope if we never achieve resources. Now, the secret is you're closer maybe to the latter version of this.
Yes.
Than the unlimited resources. You're closer to you're always likely to be closer to that. You've got to figure out how to make it work with the limited things you have. Only few entrepreneurs ever get the benefit of just like lots of money up front to do whatever they want.
Right. It's usually the ones that don't need it.
Yeah, exactly.
That's true.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about Colleen. Our twins are 5 years old, and they're having a hard time, staying in their bed at night, and they want to get up, and so every night we have this talk about like equipping them for like, how are you going to handle it when you wake up in the middle of the night? Here's your flashlight, and here's your guardian teddy bear, and here's your, and here's your indicator lamp that tells you whether it's time to get up or not time to get up. And so I'm thinking that these exercises, it's parallel, right? Like doing all those stories about your possible paths financially for your organization, about customer acquisition, or about your financials, or about whatever aspect of your business, allows you to have already thought through what that scenario could be like, so that when someone asks you questions or when you encounter it, you kind of already have put some thought into it. And that's very useful.
No, that's great. And earlier we talked about John about the story blocks, so you'll have something.
Same thing,
connected.
right?
Yeah.
You've already thought through it. So, if you had to piece it together quickly, like you've already kind of got something in your pocket. You already understand your business and understand the pieces of your business that people are interested in, and you can piece it together and tell that story in a very flexible way and with confidence, because you've really put some thought and care into it.
We talked a little bit about fiction, and I think it's important to say a little bit that you don't want to lie to people.
Right. It's not intentionally fiction. It's just fiction because it isn't real yet. It's not because you're making it up and you're trying to scam somebody.
Yeah. And you want to, because especially when you're talking to investors and things like that, you don't want to be lying about,
right.
We have a nice trial going on right now of people who exaggerated a little bit too much on the abilities of their company.
Yeah.
And so there's a point where you're talking about the big dream. And I think, and then you say, here's where we're actually at in reality at this point, so that it's clearly communicated. Because I think investors and those people want to know about the big opportunity.
Yeah.
But in the end, they also need to know where you're actually at. Not the fiction, but it boils down. And now I'm going to tell you the facts. Where we're at.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Joanna, final thoughts. If you were pitching tonight, what would you be telling yourself? What would you tell little Joanna if you're gonna pitch your 2-minute pitch? What one tip you would give yourself?
Make your pitch half the amount of time that is allotted to you.
Okay, yeah, because sometimes there's little pauses.
You pause, and somehow you have this sudden urge to ad lib in the middle, and it takes up all your time. So like if you get 2 minutes, try to do a pitch in 1 minute, and it's going to take you 2 minutes. Even if you've timed yourself perfectly 100 times, you're still going to take 2 minutes to do the 1 minute pitch. So give yourself time to pause. Don't pitch by talking faster. It makes it way harder on your audience. Shoot, I got through 5 minutes of content in 2 minutes because I was do you remember the Micro Machine commercials?
Oh yeah, right.
From Micro Machines.
Yeah.
They have an auctioneer doing it, and you can't understand. So I would just take your time, just only say the key things, and don't try to tell everything.
Great tip. Sam, what would you tell little Sam getting ready for tonight for demo day? One or two tips?
I think it would be, be that jet, right? I'll take a borrow again from Guy. Be the jet, and going with Joanna, get to your point as quickly as possible, right? I mean, try to do that in the first 30 seconds.
Yeah.
And then if you spend a minute and a half kind of having some, different thoughts and things, or you need to be cut off at 2 minutes because you're running out of time, at least you got your point across in the first 30 seconds.
Yeah.
And I think everybody will bear with some of the hows, because it's, that business model, how you're doing it. That will differ a lot from presentation to presentation, given, but that first 30 seconds, you'll hear it. The best presenters do it the exact same way across the board. Every entrepreneur who's successful does that first 30 seconds the exact same.
I love it. I think
Carling, what's your tip?
I one offhand, I always feel like I'll use a sports analogy. I don't know Joanna on this one, but there's a guy named Kobe Bryant. He's pretty solid. He was really solid. He was a great basketball player, but he always said, do quantity, meaning reps, put the reps in, and then you'll get quality. So meaning that I try to practice this more.
For sure.
Right?
Obvious.
And maybe practice in front of your wife or your daughter, or just practice on someone just so you can get comfortable. But the more reps you get in offhand, when you have that time in your own audience, you'll have more quality. So that's a Kobe Bryant tip. More reps, then you'll get that quality offhand. So put some work in there. That's all. And I think this has been a great for all the 10 incubators who are going to be presenting tonight. Totally best of luck. There's really great groups out there. Stuart, thanks for the really great questions offhand. That was solid.
You're welcome, and thank you for
And
everybody on the panel for all the answers. I found these incredibly valuable. Thank you.
And Professor Clark, any other last feedback on the Innovation Hub? Anything coming up? Any announcements or anything of that nature? You want the Innovation
So
Hub?
we have a couple of things that let everybody know who's watching this. One is we have our quick pitch competition coming up on November 16th. And so you'll want to go to the Innovation Hub website, csusm.edu/Innovation Hub, and register for the quick pitch. So that's an opportunity to share what you're working on and the problem and the solution. That's all you need. You don't need a business model at this point in time. We're just talking about ideas and come share kind of the things you're working on. You get a chance to win $500 that quick pitch. One important thing about it is it's an audience judged event.
Oh, I like that.
The audience gets to participate and vote for the winning pitch. So bring your friends too, family, people from the community, whoever you can, because the more people you invite, it improves your chances of winning, which is fun. And then we also have the Innovation Challenge, which is it's an organizational student org challenge. So if you're part of a student organization on campus, see if your organization is competing. If they're not, convince them to do so. That is deadline is November 18th for your executive summary. And so those are coming up really quickly around the corner. And so we hope that you guys will join us for some fun entrepreneurial opportunities, and also to potentially win some money.
No, that's great. I mean, yes, I love how you guys are supporting your team. Stuart, you had a question?
Oh, Sam, I want to know if anybody can participate virtually if they can't show up in person. I just want to know.
We haven't talked about that yet, but it sounds like a good idea.
Solid.
I'll put a note here.
But no, that's good. Yeah, the one tonight, Professor Clark and Joanna and Stuart, is all virtual. So it'd be interesting. So after tonight, this is the last kind of like formal event. Tomorrow at startup. This is our kind of startup month. Tomorrow we're gonna have kind of like our awards dinner and things of that nature. So we're closing out the month, but no, it's been all good, and Fokcus has been really trying to help the community through these other organizations. So it's been good. Jonah, any final thoughts? Any feedback? Anything you want to say to anyone?
No, I'm good. I think it was a good discussion. I like all the Sam had quite a few insightful things. I really like the Guy Kawasaki idea, but he said a few other solid things too. So it might be worth watching this one twice.
Yeah, this is on demand.
Good insight. Watch 2 times.
All right.
And like and subscribe.
Like and subscribe. Okay, that's good.
We don't have Steven saying that anymore.
Yeah, we gotta do that. Like and subscribe. We gotta do that. This be on YouTube. All right. Take care, everybody.